everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Bree. On this channel, I am going to talk about victims and their stories. As someone who lost someone in my family to murder that's still unsolved to this day, I think it's really important to share the lives of victims and their loved ones. On August 13th, 1996 was one of the most gruesome cases in Jackson County history. But first, we have to start at the very beginning. Jeffrey Lee Wolfe was born on November 29th, 1974 in Harris County, Texas. Growing up, he was a really good kid. He loved dogs, football, motorcycles, and according to his dad, pretty women. He was an all-American type of guy. Jeffrey told his dad, Pascal, that him and his new girlfriend, Brooke, were going to leave the next day to go on a little trip to Jackson County, Mississippi. Known and named for the majestic Spanish moss that hangs in its historic oak trees, Moss Point is home to beautiful old homes and historic churches. It is located at the junction of the Pascagoula and Escatawba rivers. And I was actually born in Pascagoula at Singing River Hospital in 1993. Actor Channing Tatum and musician Jimmy Buffett spent a good bit of their childhood in Pascagoula. Jimmy Buffett's home he grew up in is now a museum on Roosevelt Street. The Gulf Coast is known for its beaches. It is very hot and very humid. A lot of people come for vacation and the casinos. The coast is very popular when it comes to fishing, boating, water skiing, swimming, and so much more. In 1996, the population of Moss Point was 18,000, and in 2020, it dropped to 13,000. Jeffrey and Brooke had only known each other a few weeks when Jeffrey asked her to come with him on a trip to the Gulf Coast to pick up some money his friends owed him. Brooke later learned the debt was from a couple weeks earlier when Jeffrey sold some weed. While on the Gulf Coast, Jeffrey also planned to buy new rims and tires for his vehicle and then drive through New Orleans with Brooke for a short vacation on the way back to Houston. At the time, Jeffrey had about $1,200 and Brooke had $200. Back in 1996, that was enough money to have a really good time. When they arrived to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, they checked into the King's Inn Hotel in Pascagoula. After getting settled in, Jeffrey and Brooke decided to take a little nap. They were exhausted from the 6-hour drive. Then a short time later, Jeffrey got up and left Brooke at the hotel, and then he went to see Sonny Milano, Timothy Milano's brother. Sonny worked at a tire store nearby, and Jeffrey had met him during a previous visit to the Gulf Coast. Jeffrey expressed an interest in buying some tires and rims, and Sonny had suggested that he come by his store. So on August 12th, Jeffrey visited the store, talked to Sonny's boss, and invited Sonny to go to dinner that night. Sonny showed up at the motel with his fiancée Jennifer, and they rode with Jeffrey and Brooke to a Shoney's restaurant. While eating, Jeffrey asked Sonny if he planned to go to Gary Simmons' house later, and Sonny's fiancée said he's not going. She didn't want Sonny going to Gary's. After dinner, the couples returned to the motel. Sonny dropped Jeffrey and Brooke off and took his fiancée home. Jeffrey and Brooke then left their motel room and made 2 trips to Gary's house in between 10 and 11 p.m., but found that no one was home. So they went to a local store and picked up some cigarettes and a drink. They then decided to walk around Pascagoula Walmart to pass some time. Then they returned to the motel and relaxed for a little bit. In the meantime, Sonny didn't listen to his fiancée and he drove to Gary's house anyway, and that's where he found both Gary and his brother Timothy. Sonny told Gary that he had just had dinner with Jeffrey, and he gave Gary the name of the motel and the room number Jeffrey was staying in. Around 12 a.m., Gary told Sonny to call Jeffrey. Sonny called and told Jeffrey that Gary's home, you can come whenever. So Jeffrey said he would be there in a few minutes. shots. Following the phone call, Gary told Sonny to leave, and Timothy asked Sonny to follow him home because his taillights were out. Sonny followed Timothy home a little after midnight, and he did not see Timothy again that evening. Whenever Jeffrey and Brooke arrived at Gary's house, they seen Gary sitting on his front porch smoking a joint. They walked up and the three began talking. Gary offered them some weed. Brooke said sure, and her and Gary smoked a little, but Jeffrey said no, he didn't want any. Timothy drove up as they were finishing the joint. Gary was related to Timothy and Sonny Milano by marriage because Gary was married to their sister Lori, but that marriage ended in a divorce. Now, I want to mention Timothy Milano is a friend of Jeffrey's. Timothy is the one who introduced Jeffrey to Gary, and Jeffrey sold him a lot of weed. Jeffrey brought Timothy to his dad Pascal's house one day and said, "Dad, this is a friend of mine," and asked, could he stay a while? And being the kind-hearted man Pascal is, he said yes, of course. He ended up staying there for about a month. After Timothy arrived at Gary's, Gary offered them a beer, and all four went inside to the kitchen and living room area. Gary walked into the kitchen to grab a beer while Brooke sat down at a table in the living room to roll another joint. Brooke heard Jeffrey and Timothy talking in the doorway that separated the kitchen and the living room. Jeffrey mentioned the money he was owed. Gary and Timothy owed Jeffrey between $12,000 to $20,000. Timothy said they didn't have the money and they didn't have the weed. Gary returned from the kitchen when Timothy told Jeffrey this, and Brooke, still looking down, rolling the joint, out of nowhere heard gunshots, and she looked up, and all she seen was Jeffrey fall to the ground. Immediately after, Gary grabbed Brooke and ordered her not to look in the direction of Jeffrey's body. Brooke noticed Timothy standing directly behind Jeffrey, holding a .22. Gary quickly grabbed Brooke from the kitchen and he took her into a back bedroom. He placed her face down on the floor and laid on top of her, asking whether she or Jeffrey were cops, why they were there, whether they had any drugs, and who knew they were there. Brooke was of course hysterical. She told Gary she didn't know anything, that her and Jeffrey only became acquainted a couple of weeks prior. Brooke actually said it may have been crazy she went on this trip without knowing all the details, but she was only 18 at the time. She had just gotten out of high school, and she thought he was very good looking with the long dark hair and the tattoos, and he was just very exciting to her. After Gary finished questioning Brooke, he tied her hands behind her back and to her feet. Basically, he hog-tied her. He asked Timothy, "What do you want to do with her?" And Timothy said he didn't care. Gary then placed Brooke in a large metal box in the bedroom, similar to an army surplus box. Brooke later said that the box was pitch black. She couldn't see anything. All she could do is pray and pray. Brooke managed to untie the rope and began kicking at the box, trying to open it. Gary returned, opened the box, and found that Brooke had freed herself. He took her out of the box and stripped her of all of her clothing and jewelry. Gary then tied her up again and placed her back in the box. He told her that he was on a time frame and not to mess up his time. I cannot imagine what she was going through. Brooke untied the ropes again and began kicking and pushing at the lid of the box, trying to open it. After some time, Gary came back. This time, when he came back, he was completely naked, and it appeared as though he had taken a shower. She told him that she was on her period. Brooke realized that Gary was going to force himself on her, and he told her to remove her tampon. So she did. Then told Brooke that her life depended on how well she performed sexually. He then put a condom on and assaulted her. Brooke later said she thought he was holding a gun to the back of her head. After the assault, Gary asked Timothy if he wanted to get in on the action, and Timothy said no. Gary then took Brooke to the bathroom and allowed her to clean up with a sock. and then he clipped off her fake fingernails because she scratched him during the assault. Then again, tied her up and locked her in the box. While Brooke was locked in the box, Gary and Timothy went on with their plan to dispose of Jeffrey's body. Gary worked as a butcher at Wayne Lee's grocery in Pascagoula. The day Jeffrey and Brooke arrived in Pascagoula, Gary worked his regular shift. Gary's co-worker Charles Jenkins later told investigators that Gary sharpened all of his knives and took them home from work for the weekend. Charles said that this was unusual because everyone normally leaves their knives at work. The only time that Charles ever seen anyone taking their knives home from work was before leaving on an extended vacation or quitting the job. Gary, being a butcher by trade, knew exactly how to dismember someone. Gary laid out his knives and began dismembering Jeffrey in the bathtub. After gutting him and severing his head and limbs, Gary, with Timothy's help, began moving Jeffrey's remains into the bayou that ran behind Gary's property using a boat Gary borrowed from his neighbor Donald Taylor. Alligators are known to be all in that area. The bayou had a running current that eventually, through tributaries, fed into the Gulf of Mexico. Brooke, still locked in the box, again managed to untie herself. Gary returned to the box smoking a joint and offered some to Brooke. She accepted. After sharing the joint, Gary locked Brooke back in the box, but this time with a blanket, where she eventually fell asleep. She woke up to the telephone ringing, and it rang, and rang. When no one answered it and it went to the voice answering machine, Brooke realized that Gary might not be home. She told herself, if you're ever gonna get out of here, now's the time. Because Brooke was so small, she was able to get up on her knees inside of the box, and she would push her shoulders up against the lid over and over until finally it gave in and the lid popped off. Finding the house completely silent and no one around, Brooke found a garbage bag with her clothes and jewelry that had been taken from her earlier. When she walked out of the room, she was expecting to see Jeffrey laying on the floor or even blood, but there wasn't. It was spotless, super clean, not a drop of blood in sight. She grabbed a butcher knife that was sitting on the kitchen counter and some keys, and after looking around and still not seeing anyone, she seen her opportunity. She seen the front door, and she took off running. She ran for her life. She didn't know if Gary or Timothy seen or heard her escaping. She just ran. She managed to run across the street to a neighbor's house. By this time, it was daylight. Brooke knocked on the neighbor's door and told them that people in Gary's house had killed her friend to call the police. The neighbor didn't let her in the house, so Brooke sat on the swing on the front porch. While she was sitting there waiting, she seen Gary drive up to his house. He got out of his car with something in his hand. Brooke dropped the items she was carrying and hid behind some bushes. She said she was so scared she was going to get caught. Her whole body was shaking and her teeth were chattering. Gary was in his house for about 60 seconds and he ran back out empty-handed and jumped back in his car and sped off. When the police finally arrived, Brooke ran in the street and was jumping up and down, waving her arms. She was crying hysterically. She could barely talk. Tim Hallen, a patrolman with the Moss Point Police Department, talked with Brooke for 45 minutes to an hour before he could even understand what she was trying to say because she was so hysterical. She kept saying, "They killed Jeff," while pointing to a house across the street. Finally, Hallen and two other officers took Brooke to Gary's house. Officer Hallen remained outside. Lee Merrill, an investigator with the Moss Point Police Department, was also called to Gary's house that morning. When he arrived, Officer Hallen and another police officer was questioning Brooke. After about 15 minutes, he determined that she was saying that she had been assaulted and held in a box inside Gary's house. Detective Lee Merrill and another investigator, Richard Cushman, entered the house to look for the victim or any signs of a crime. They took Brooke inside briefly, checking the kitchen, the living room, and the bedroom. Although they did not find Jeffrey, they did observe evidence that a crime took place. They found a tampon on the floor, portions of fingernails in a trash can, a used condom, 8 .22 caliber shell casings, and a gun leaning against the door between the living room and the kitchen. They also found Jeffrey and Brooke's personal items that were originally left in their hotel room. Gary went to their hotel room at King's Inn and took their stuff and brought it back to his house. I guess he was going to try and make it seem like they were never there, but who knows. The house was then declared a crime scene and secured. Detective Cushman left to obtain a search warrant. While the other officers were waiting for him to return, they discovered pieces of flesh in a boat on Gary's property. Further investigation revealed pieces of flesh in the bayou on the side of Gary's house. The bayou flowed into the Gulf of Mexico and was subject to tidal flow and is known to be full of alligators. Concerned that tides and animals in the bayou might destroy the evidence, they began collecting it. Ultimately, pieces of flesh and blood were found in 4 5-gallon white buckets near the bayou, and also a knife, a bush hook, a machete, a gallon of Clorox bleach, a boat paddle with a bloody fingerprint, and a scrub brush that had traces of blood near the boat. Searchers found body parts in the water, which they collected with plastic bags. Before officers retrieved all the body parts from the bayou, investigator Cushman returned with the warrant. Employees of the Mississippi Crime Lab arrived to collect evidence. Dr. Paul McGarry, a forensic pathologist, assisted in the recovery of the body parts from the bayou, as did the Jackson County coroner George Sherman and several other officers. They retrieved skin, tissue, muscle, pieces of the chest and abdominal walls, lungs, a heart, a liver, fingers with the fingerprints missing, toes, and sexual organs. All had marks of precision cutting. Searchers found Jeffrey's head in the middle of the bayou, which had been severed just below the jawline. Jeffrey weighed 177 pounds at the time of his death. They only found 118 pounds of him because the alligators ate the rest of him. Rita Taylor, a neighbor that lived across the street from Gary, told detectives that she was awake at about 2 a.m. on the morning of August 13th. After doing some house cleaning, she went outside between 3 to 4 a.m. with some paperwork to put in the glove box of her truck. When she did, she saw Timothy Milano unlock Gary's door and enter his house. A few minutes later, she noticed Gary and Timothy carrying white buckets to the bayou. Her husband also told detectives that Gary had approached him right after work on Monday, August 12th, and asked to borrow his boat. He gave Gary permission and stated that he saw the boat pulled up on Gary's land when he left for work the next morning. Now we know Gary used this boat to dispose of Jeffrey's remains. In Dr. McGarry's examination of Jeffrey's remains, he found the bullet wounds occurred while Jeffrey was alive, but the remaining injuries, including those inflicted by a hatchet or cleaver and others by a bolt cutter, occurred after death. Examination of the skin where the bullet holes were found, as well as the t-shirt he was wearing on the night he was murdered, indicated that he was shot at least 5 times in the back. The gunshot wounds were determined to be the cause of death. Soon after the murder and dismemberment of Jeffrey, Timothy was found and arrested at his apartment, and Gary, still being on the run, went to a mall in Mobile, Alabama, which is about 25 to 30 minutes from Moss Point. He recorded a videotape for his ex-wife Lori and their children, where throughout the video recording, Gary told his family in the most general terms about what he had done, although he never specifically admitted to committing any crimes. Back in the day, you can go to the mall and get your pictures taken like glamour shots. My family always did the corny family photos with the ridiculous backdrops and the terrible poses. But you could also pay to record a video.
I guess it's a real mess, isn't it? It wasn't supposed to go like that. I don't know what to tell you. To my way of thinking, I didn't have much of a choice. I mean, I'd already taken his money.
So Gary made the video and mailed the video cassette to his ex-wife and drove back to the coast. His ex-wife, Lori, would later give it to his attorney. When he got home from Mobile, he went home, and that's when he found that Brooke had escaped. So he immediately left again. So now it's August 14th, a day after the murder. Dennis Guest came home from work to find his friend Gary asleep on his couch. Gary confessed to Dennis that he had to whack a drug dealer. And according to Dennis, the killing came after an argument between the two parties. In Dennis's words, the boy broke bad on him, and this is what happened. Gary told Dennis that he had deboned him, cut him up in little pieces, and put him in the bayou. He then told Dennis he used a butcher knife and bolt cutters to get the job done. He further told detectives that Gary admitted they had sex with Jeffrey's female companion and had planned to keep her as a sex toy and train her, but she escaped. Gary expressed disappointment that Jeffrey only had $1,000 on him, as Gary had assumed he had $20,000 or so. After Gary finished his story, he told Dennis that he believes his options were to run in his own life or turn himself in. They decided that he should turn himself in. So Gary called a Jackson County deputy who came with Detective Lee Merle to pick him up. A coworker actually said Gary is a nice guy, but he had a strange side to him. He would occasionally talk about fantasies involving locking women up. Gary and Timothy were both charged with first-degree murder. Whenever Pascal learns that Jeffrey's so-called friend Timothy shot and killed his son, he was furious and sick to his stomach at the same time. That man-child ate at his table, slept under his roof, used his car, and Pascal even washed Timothy's clothes. And to think he did this to his son is sickening. He thought he did him a favor letting him stay with them. For him to repay him by shooting his son 7 times in the back and twice in the chest. After the arrest of Gary and Timothy, Pascal went into a deep depression. He drank a lot, and he would drink anything he could get his hands on. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He would go get in his truck and go to Jeffrey's grave and sit there and drink beer and talk to him. He stayed drunk, trying to numb the pain of losing his son. As the trial was approaching, Pascal's rage consumed him. He decided he was going to take his revenge. He told all his brothers and sisters goodbye because he might not come back. He wanted to get to the courtroom and get as close to Gary and Timothy as he could and kill them. In his mind, he planned it all out. He was going to get his pistol with his hollow point bullets and shoot both of them until he ran out of bullets or until he got shot. He didn't care what happened to him. They took something away from him that no one could replace. He had so much hate and hurt in his heart that when he walked into the courtroom, he told himself, "Here's my chance. Nobody's going to stop me." Whenever he walked into the courthouse, there weren't any metal detectors. He said, "This is it. This is my chance." He was determined to do what he was going to do. But when the doors opened, they only brought one guy in. The DA told him that there's one of the murderers right there. And Pascal asked, "Where's the other one at? The one I know, Timmy." The DA said they weren't bringing him in, that they were trying him separate. So Pascal thought, what good would it have done to kill one and not kill the other one? He said if he would have gotten to both of them, he would have killed both of them because you aren't supposed to bury your kids. Gary's trial was set for August 25th, 1997. Timothy's trial was set for a year later, July 27th, 1998. To ensure a conviction, prosecutors needed Brooke to testify. She's the only living witness, but she is terrified of Gary Simmons. He sent her death threats from prison. Being the only living witness, if the witness was to disappear, then he could probably get away with murder. Whenever Brooke took the stand, she she was shaking. Let me just say that Brooke is a strong woman. I know she's a country girl, and us country girls are born tough, but to get up there and relive the nightmare she experienced is just so brave. Whenever she took the stand, Gary was staring at her with the most coldest, most evil look. She was petrified. She couldn't stop shaking. Her hands would shake, and when she would sit on them, her legs would shake. She just couldn't make it stop. But then she looked over at Jeffrey's parents. They were sitting right there, listening to everything. And she knew if they could sit there and take it, then she could sit there and make sure that Jeffrey didn't die in vain. And no matter how hard it was, he didn't die, and these people were going to get away with it. After Brooke testified, she went into hiding. She never felt safe after that. She always had a fear in the back of her mind that Gary would make good on his promise and have her killed. She changed her first and last name. She cut all her hair off and dyed her blonde hair dark brown. She was never the same, which is completely understandable after everything she went through. Gary Carl Simmons, age 34, was convicted of RAPE, kidnapping, capital murder with the underlining felony of robbery. On August 29, 1997, he was sentenced to life imprisonment on both the sexual assault charge and kidnapping charges, and sentenced to death on the capital murder charge. Gary and Timothy were tried separately for capital murder and kidnapping charges. Timothy John Milano, age 21, was convicted in the Circuit Court of Jackson County, Mississippi, of the crimes of capital murder and kidnapping. Timothy was sentenced to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole for the capital murder charge and 30 years for the kidnapping charge, with both sentences to run consecutively. Even with the convictions, Jeffrey's dad still wasn't satisfied. He said, "I want you to remember one thing and one thing only, Gary. When you go to take your last breath, remember, when you die, I'm going to drink a cold beer on your ass." Gary's insane last meal request: one Pizza Hut medium super supreme deep dish pizza, double portion with mushrooms, onions, jalapeno peppers, and pepperoni. Another pizza, regular portion with 3 cheeses, olives, bell pepper, tomatoes, garlic, and Italian sausage, 10 8-ounce packs of Parmesan cheese, 10 8-ounce packs of ranch dressing, 1 family-size bag of nacho cheese Doritos, 8-ounce jalapeno nacho cheese, 4-ounce sliced jalapenos, 2 large strawberry milkshakes, 2 20-ounce cherry cokes, 1 super-size order of McDonald's fries with extra ketchup and mayonnaise, and 2 pints of strawberry ice cream. A 28,974 calorie feast. Jeffrey's dad and stepmom held hands as they watched the execution from the witness room. Wearing a John Deere hat and camo shirt, Pascal Wolfe watched intently as Gary made his final statement. Gary's final words: "I've been blessed to be loved by some good people, by some amazing people. I thank them for their support. Now let's get on so these people can go home. That's it." Gary Carl Simmons, age 49, was pronounced dead June 12, 2012 at 6:16 p.m. by lethal injection at Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman. This case is very close to home for me. I live 25 minutes from Gary's house. Me and my husband actually went to the location, and I have some video footage of that. So in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, and a lot of people lost their homes. I know my family did. Gary's house was also destroyed, so they ended up tearing it down. So all that remains is a concrete slab where it once stood. But I still wanted to show y'all what it looks like today. Right here is the side of Gary's house. I'm standing right where the front porch was, and where Gary was sitting when Jeffrey and Brooke first pulled up. All the houses in this area are abandoned. That small brown house way over there is where Brooke ran when she escaped. Now I am walking into what was Gary's house. You could see how small the house actually was. I believe it was a 1-bedroom by how small the actual slab is. So now I'm on the side of Gary's house and what was his driveway. This is the bayou where they found Jeffrey's remains. It is so heartbreaking knowing what happened here 27 years ago. This case is so heartbreaking. I pray that Brooke and Pascal are doing well today. That is all I have for y'all today. I really appreciate y'all taking the time to watch my video. It means so, so much to me. So until next time, please remember, the world is a better place with you in it.